Coming up on tonight's episode of Faith versus Culture, we're going to talk about misplaced mercy, a conversation with Abby Johnson you don't want to miss. Coming up next.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. My name is Dan Andros. I'm the managing editor of FaithWire.com, and I'm joined, as always, by Billy Hallowell. Billy, what's going on?
Doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation today because as we've talked about on our podcast, on the show before, language is such a powerful tool. And what we see, I think, a lot in modern culture is this tendency to sort of take something. It's very much Romans 1 playing out. People are worshiping and praising and gravitating towards the things that are evil. But they put, how does that happen? And a lot of times it's because flowery language gets pushed on these different areas. So Billy, the title of the show, Misplaced Mercy, we end up thinking we're doing something good, but it's completely the opposite.
Well, and that's the impact of misusing language, right? It convinces people over time that they need to believe that this certain thing they're thinking or doing is mercy. And the challenge, I think, for Christians is understanding that people actually really believe this. It's not just like, oh, they're saying it. That
Right.
misuse of language has actually bred that sort of distortion of the truth in people's minds and hearts.
Yeah, and one of those people that has lived that experience and is thankfully she has had an incredible testimony, and we're going to go through some of her story today, and she's got a new book out as well. Abby Johnson, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and so but let's just start real quick with the book, and it's called Fierce Mercy, Daring to Live Out God's Compassion in Bold, Practical Ways. Just tell us a little bit about that and the heart behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, Unplanned came out, super successful. Most people know about that, the book and the film. And, Unplanned stopped 9 months after I had left Planned Parenthood. And, honestly, I didn't really have a good grasp of who I was even when Unplanned came out. And, when the book came out. And so much has happened in my life. I mean, I have been shown God's mercy in so many different ways in my life in the past 12 years. And even just in my motherhood, I mean, we have 8 children now. When I left Planned Parenthood, I had 1. And in my marriage and in the ministry that I have created with former abortion workers. And I just felt like, I need to talk about this. I need to showcase God's mercy in some form, and preferably a book. And so that's really what this book is about. It's not just about me, though. It's really about God, and it's about what God has done in my life and how He can work this. Really, I mean, the amount of mercy that He shows us is really scandalous, and how He can work, this amount of mercy in your life. And then what do we do with it? How do we then show that type of mercy that Jesus shows us? How do we show that to other people that we encounter every day, or the people that we have been withholding mercy from? How do we overcome that barrier?
Yeah, and I have to ask you, Abby, because you brought up Unplanned, and as you're talking through this, knowing your story and knowing some of the challenges, when you made a decision, you obviously wrote a book, and writing a book is one thing, putting the story out there, but showing the story is a very different thing. And when you made that decision to say, okay, you can make a movie about this and show people who I was and who I am now, what were some of the challenges with that when you saw what that was going to look like before it came out to everyone else?
Yeah, I mean, originally I did not want to do the film. Unplanned. Originally, I said, no, thank you. I felt like I had been vulnerable enough in the book. And I just thought, I'm not interested in seeing my greatest sins, the worst part of my life. I'm not interested in everybody seeing that up on a screen, right?
Sure,
my parents are going to see this. My grandma's going to see this. Like, I'm not interested in that, But then, God kept calling me. And so like, I just kept saying no. Finally, my husband was like, have you even prayed about this? And I was like, no, shut up. And, I knew that God was calling me to do this, but I just kept shutting the door. And so finally I said, okay, I'll do it. And that's actually the first chapter of Fierce Mercy is about me going on to the set of Unplanned for the first time. And, I roll up on the set of Unplanned. They had turned this office building into my former clinic. And, it had the fence and everything up. And I walk onto the set, and everybody there, all the extras, the cast, the crew, everybody's like, oh my gosh, Abby Johnson's here, and they're treating me like a celebrity. And I start looking at the filming that's going on, and I'm watching. I've never been on a film set before, and I'm watching everything that's going on, and I'm watching this actress portray me, and I'm watching her living this life that is such a terrible time of my life, right? And an embarrassing time of my life, honestly. And I wanted to get back into my car, slink down on the floorboard, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am not a celebrity. I'm so embarrassed right now. I don't want anybody to know that I'm even here. I wanted to run back into my car and, drive back to Texas. I mean, I was so embarrassed in that moment, and it felt so vulnerable. And I just really wanted to say to the directors, you know what, on second thought, can we just cancel this? I actually don't want to do this anymore. But as I sat there, I remember one of the directors, Carrie Solomon, like reached over and he grabbed my hand, and I was crying, and he just reached over and grabbed my hand. And I just remember, God really speaking to me in that moment and just saying, this is not about you. And that was really, that was what I needed to, be poured into my heart at that moment, because honestly, the movie could have been about somebody named Alice Jones, right? For all it, it didn't matter. It wasn't about Abby Johnson. This was God's story, and it was really about proclaiming his heart and his love of conversion. And so, it was a beautiful moment, but it was also a moment where God really did show me and really pour out mercy onto me once again.
I think that's that's just a really fascinating look at somebody tackling something that fear of man, because fear of man is so powerful. It really is. It holds us back from doing so much. So I wanted to ask you, because you kind of just powered through that. And once you got through to the other side of that, I'm sure it probably didn't happen like instantaneously or overnight, but did you feel sort of a freeing thing? Because I know anytime I experience something, obviously I haven't to the level that you have with movies and everything else, but when you share something like about your past, about your testimony that is giving God glory, but like you said, exposes that embarrassing part of your life or the shameful part of your life. But when you actually do it, then there's this power that you feel, and you feel just free. And so then you wonder, like, why did I wait to do that? Did you have that same experience?
I did, but it took some time, honestly, Dan. Yeah. So the producers came down to my home, and they showed me the first like rough cut of the film, and they wanted me to see it first. So they flew down to my house. They show me, and I had seen clips of the film, but I hadn't seen it like put together. So they come to my house, they sit on my couch, they, pop the film on my TV, and Doug and I are sitting on the couch and we're all sitting there watching it. And we get done with it. And, I'm like, wow, guys, that was great, and they leave. And I remember, we say our goodbyes, we hug them bye or whatever. We go back in, we sit on the couch, and I didn't really know what to say. And Doug was like, he looked at me and he said, well, what do you think? And I looked back at him and I said, I don't want to do this. And he said, well, honey, it's a little too late for that. and then again, Doug looked at me and said, Abby, it's not about you. And so it was like those words like just kept coming, and it was like just this reminder, that I needed over and over again. And I was like, you're right. It's not about me. And so when the film, that was sort of the final hesitancy that I had, was that moment. And God really like pulled me up out of it. And then I got really excited about it. I got really excited about the idea that, oh my gosh, like people, like God could really do something amazing with this, right? And people, they could really be converted. I mean, lives could really be saved. I mean, there's a reason that this is happening, right? And then when people were, doing the private screenings of the film, and that's when I started getting emails. The emails were pouring in from people every day. And during the pre-release, and I was getting emails from people saying, Abby, I brought a friend to the pre-release and they walked in super pro-choice and they walked out pro-life, and they'll never support abortion again. Or people were saying, I brought a client from my pregnancy center and they were going to choose abortion and they walked out and now they're choosing life for their baby. And that was when I felt like God was really empowering me. And I felt so free from any shame that I felt, with, people seeing that story. Then I wanted everybody to see it. Then I was like,
it's totally flipped.
Story, right? Like I felt like I'm open now, right? Like I'm completely open. I just felt very like ripped open and was like, everybody watch it, everybody see it, and God really empowered me through that moment. But it did take time. Like it did take steps, and it did take God and the Holy Spirit and my husband even just continuing to remind me and point me back to God and saying, this is not about you. It's not about you. This is about God. And that is a message of mercy, right? Always pointing back to God, reminding us it's not about man. It's not about what we do here on this earth, but always pointing us back to the kingdom of God.
A great perspective to keep. And we're going to dive more into this topic. You can't get enough. We're talking about God's mercy, really, honestly. It's the greatest gift that we have on this side of creation. So we'll be back to talk more on Faith versus Culture right after this. All right, we're back on this episode of Faith versus Culture. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there. We're joined by Abby Johnson, her new book, Fierce Mercy, Daring to Live Out God's Compassion in Bold, Practical Ways. So we're talking about that and more today.
So, Abby, I have to ask you, when we talk about misplaced mercy, right, the assumption that we're doing something with mercy when we're actually not, when we're compromising truth, take us back to your mindset before your conversion when you were working in the clinic. Did you think you were providing mercy to women?
I did. I mean, I have to say, I got involved in Planned Parenthood believing that I was going to be helping women. And I did believe I was helping them. I did believe that I was doing the right thing. I remember having a conversation with a family member of mine one time. And, we were talking about Christianity. And I went to church the whole time that I worked at Planned Parenthood. Now, it was a very pro-abortion church. It was one that it was an Episcopalian church, and their national doctrine supports abortion. So, but I mean, I went to church believing like I am a, pro-choice Christian. And I remember talking to a family member of mine one time and saying, I don't know how any Christian could not support a woman's right to abortion. How could you be a Christian and then send a woman to a back alley abortion clinic? How could you do that? How could you, hurt women in that way? And so I did really believe that I was providing Christian compassion to these women, because I was completely separating the woman from the child that was in her womb, because that's what you have to do in order to do your job each and every day. But then I realized, gosh, if I really want to help women, the only way I can do that is by leaving this facility that I'm currently working at. And that's what we hear from the majority of our clients. And then there were none. They get involved. Nobody gets involved in the abortion clinic because they're like, I want to kill babies. That's not the way it is. They get involved because they want to help women. And then they leave because they realize, I want to help women. And the only way they can help women is by getting out of that clinic. And I think one of the things, talking about misplaced mercy, misplaced compassion would be the same thing. And I talk about that all the time, particularly with young people. Society is preying on our young people today and, using them and this idea of misplaced compassion. And they're saying to them, oh, you have to support abortion because if you don't, then that's mean, that you're not being compassionate toward the mother, right? You have to support, the LGBT agenda because if you don't, and you don't allow people to marry whoever they want, then that's mean, right? And so all of these things that they're trying to convince young people to support are against the, biblical foundations of Christ, but they're trying to just really prey on their compassionate heart. But really, what is biblical is compassionate. God's truth is compassionate. But that's not what we're teaching them. We're teaching them that the ways of the world are compassionate, but that's really not true compassion. Yeah. That's really not true mercy.
Yeah. And my answer to when they say that is, or my question is always, by what standard? I love throwing that in there. But that always leads to an interesting conversation. But I wanted to ask you about, now you're in a pro-life ministry and you're active in that, how important this message of mercy is, and God's mercy in particular, of course, when women realize, or people realize, that they've either had an abortion or they've helped, work in the abortion industry, or even just championed and supported people's right for abortion. When they realize what it is that is actually happening there, I think maybe a stumbling block for a lot of people is the fear of, oh my goodness, like I'm condemned now because of what I've done. So how important is that message of mercy in light of that?
It's extremely important. It's really the crux of our movement, because this movement, the pro-life movement, is made up of converts. This movement is made up of women who have laid on that table, of, men who have driven their wives or girlfriends to have abortions, people who have paid for abortions, people who are radical, pro-choice feminists at one point in time, people who have voted for abortion are now pro-life. That is the crux of the pro-life movement. People who, supported abortion at one time, participated in abortion at one time, and now they are staunchly pro-life. And so, I think one of the hangups that a lot of people have is understanding that God forgives us, but not being able to forgive ourselves. And, that's really a pride issue, not understanding that God is so much bigger than us. God is so much bigger than our sin. God is so much bigger than anything that we could ever do. He's so much bigger than our burdens. We are so small in comparison to how big God is. And so who are we to say that any amount of sin that we commit is bigger than the God that we serve? And so, that's something that we have to set down our pride and say we can bring anything to our God, to our Creator, and He can forgive anything because He is that great. He is that big, and He is that merciful. His mercy is that huge, and He loves us that much.
Well, Abby, thank you so much for joining us today. The book is Fierce Mercy, Daring to Live Out God's Compassion in Bold and Practical Ways. We'll be right back.
All right, we're back here on Faith versus Culture. Just wrapped up our conversation with Abby Johnson. And Billy, that's a fascinating conversation because, we talked about facing the shame of your sin and your past. And like, she's done that probably in a way that most people have not, obviously, with a whole movie being made about, the most shameful thing in your life. So amazing, that she faced it, but boy, does that give her a platform to talk about God's mercy.
It does. And it makes us think about what we believe is merciful. Is it really? We should be assessing that. Does it align with God's will and what God believes is true mercy?
Yeah. I mean, because as we mentioned at the top of the show, culture, and Abby was saying this, has just painted all of these things as compassionate and merciful. And like, she really believed working at an abortion clinic was a compassionate thing to do. And so that seems insane to most of us on the outside. Like, how is that even possible? But we have to understand when we approach this that is how many people are looking at that on the inside. So great conversation. If you're just tuning in now, I encourage you to go back and check out this full interview with Abby Johnson. So and her new book as well. So, all right, we'll be back to wrap it up on the other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture. All right, that is all the time we have for this episode of Faith versus Culture. As always, head on over to cbnnews.com, faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. We'll be praying for you this week. God bless.